Are you a professional with specialized knowledge? Well, one of the ways you can add to your income, in actually your time freedom as well, is by generating income as a consultant. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. Now, many of the individuals who have completed my course on turning your knowledge into a sustainable and steady income learn these 7 methods of consulting income. I'm going to share them with you here briefly today, as well as some tips and tricks to add these income channels to your existing financial situation. Stay to the end. These details will be powerful. Now, here's the key thing to remember. Why are we converting our subject matter expertise? Why are we converting our experience in the industry? And why are we converting it into consulting? Now, the first thing to understand is that while companies claim they don't have age discrimination, that once you reach the age of 40, if you're making 6 figures or especially high 6 figures and you're not an executive, that company actually has an incentive to move you along. The first reason is because they believe, and this is not a good belief, but it's a real belief, that the younger employees will be easier to manage and that younger employees could be taught how to do things the right way. The assumption is that problems in the organization, and this is an assumption among middle managers, is that the problems in the organization are caused by the individuals in the organization, and therefore the ones that have been there the longest have most contributed to the problems. Now, you and I know as critical thinkers that that's not the case. Very often there's a lot of institutional knowledge, but the second factor, which is when you're making a high income, that's $150,000 a year, even $100,000 a year, when a manager needs to reduce costs, it's just easier to get rid of 10 people making $100,000 a year than 100 people making $10,000 a year. And believe me, today in corporate America, there are opportunities where they're hiring people and equipment with artificial intelligence where they believe they're replacing a $100,000 person with a $10,000 investment. That's not something that you caused, but it's actually an opportunity for you as a consultant. Your subject matter expertise, your experience in the marketplace allows you to solve problems faster. And in fact, companies prefer to have a consultant pipeline for contract work and other work that is on a shorter term basis. The company doesn't want to lay off a lot of people with experience, but they also don't want to hire them. So as a high income professional, the older you get, the more of a dilemma you will face. Now, I know this firsthand. I know this from interviewing clients. I know this from talking with recruiters and coaches. Even though it's not the way it's supposed to be, this is sometimes how business relationships work in a corporate environment. However, your corporate experience, your experience in the marketplace, your subject matter expertise, your ability to solve problems has a lot of value as a consultant in the marketplace. And when you use these 7 ways to generate additional income, then you'll be happy to say goodbye to the corporate 9 to 5. You can say goodbye to commuting. You can say goodbye to long meetings because they don't keep consultants in long meetings at $150, $250, $350 an hour. My point being, though, is that it's a different world, and so you're not going to end up with just one client. In fact, in today's modern world, with the price of with inflation, wage stagnation, if you only have one client, you're in a difficult and awkward situation. So the first way for a consultant to get income is to submit job applications. Now, I know a lot of you folks are here because you got laid off at some big dumb company, and you're looking to be a consultant, and you're hoping to make big money, and because there's magic money in consulting, there's riches in those niches, but the truth of it is, you still need to apply for work. Now, you're going to expand your horizons a little bit. You'll still apply for W-2 work, but now you start adding 1099 work, and then corp-to-corp work. So the job application process, whether you're applying on somebody's website, or you're talking with a recruiter, or you're writing proposals, is still a foundational part of the income that you'll receive as a consultant. And sometimes you're going to get the majority of your money from one client, but again, you have to make sure that you're being aware in the marketplace. The typical white-collar worker has less than half the buying power after 5 years, even though their income is higher. Let me explain that in a different way. If you're hired today for $100,000 a year, In 5 years, you might make $110,000, but the buying power of that future salary in 5 years has less than 50% of the power it had day one. So that means you either need to be promoting yourself inside the organization quickly and getting pay and compensation adjustments, or you need to be either working additional opportunities, and we'll share some of those here. But it's a very serious and measurable thing you need to be aware of. Number 2 is paid consultations. There are many organizations who just want to ask questions of a subject matter expert. They want to hire somebody for just 20 minutes, for a couple hours, or just one day to look at a problem. Now, that could be inside your current industry, or it could be applying your skills and knowledge to a different industry. But a paid consultation is something that they would engage with you one-on-one. That is going to be 1099 work if you collect more than $600 a year, which you better be, because that's, we work with our clients to make sure they do. But ultimately, it's something that they're going to pay you directly. Now, what's the difference between a paid consultation and a discovery call? Well, a discovery call is something you might do for free as part of your marketing to determine if the other person is a good candidate or that their project is a good opportunity for you. Is this a match? A discovery call is always done on the phone. You'll have a lot of people say, why don't we get coffee together? Why don't we go out to lunch? No, don't do that. If you're going to go out to lunch, you're going to get coffee, that should be a paid consultation because they're going to pick your brain. So you want them picking your brain, not picking your pocket, so you charge for those meetings, even if they're paying for lunch. Unless you have a previous arrangement or you've done business with them in the past. But a discovery call is going to be just tell me about your project. What's the big problems you face? What kinds of things have you done in the past? What has worked? What hasn't worked? What are we going to do in the next step? You're not spending any time providing content. You're essentially observing, analyzing, and asking questions. The next one is intellectual property. You can make money from intellectual property. Now, in some organizations, you'll have the opportunity to get patents or to create intellectual property, which you have a residual or royalty right to. But in other cases, you can produce intellectual property outside of the employment. You have to be careful, and I'm not an employment lawyer. You have to be careful because some organizations will claim that. But if you have a history of doing open source coding, for example, doing customized scripts, doing database work, some of that IT work, and your day-to-day job is not specifically that work, it's maybe the management of that work, then ultimately you can develop intellectual property in the methods and procedures that you use to solve these problems. Intellectual property is kind of tricky if you're working for a Fortune 100 because they always assume that everything you do 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is owned by them because the great blessing of working for them has bestowed upon you secrets that they don't actually have in their organization. We could talk about that at another time, but intellectual property needs to have some kind of legal claim. It's going to be a patent, it's going to be a license, it's going to be some kind of documentation, and that's why I encourage most of my clients, well, pretty much all my clients, to use engineering notebooks. Don't write down anything on a scrap of paper. It all must go in an engineering notebook with a date, time, and context of the capture. Because if you're sitting in a business meeting and you write down the next great idea, whoever paid you to be in that room may likely own that idea. And so we want to, again, create the intellectual property, but we want to do it in a way that it allows you to monetize it. Number 4, royalties and commissions. Now, if you own intellectual property like a book, you can get royalties on that book by selling it online, and then the book also promotes you as an expert in your field. Now, I've written a number of books. I've also written courses and then plans. So many of the plans that I've written are the guidelines that I use when I sit down with a client to implement certain types of work. Because again, you can do done-for-you work where you actually go do the work for a client. You can do work where you help them solve a problem, and then you can ultimately do work where you've created an artifact or a piece of intellectual property, and they buy it and go do the work for themselves. But royalties and commissions can also come from other people's intellectual property. I know a number of consultants that use proprietary software to solve problems for clients, and they actually receive a commission when the client purchases the license for the software. And so that's the primary software that they use for the type of work that they're in, and the client eventually purchases that software or purchases a software service agreement on that enterprise software, and the consultant gets a couple $1,000s for becoming a liaison for that work. Now, it's all disclosed. The customer knows that there's a commission that they receive, but again, it's a primary product that they use for their work. So that's two ways to get royalties or commissions. Number 5, expert networks. Now, expert networks are something I was a little weary of because an expert network is used by venture capitalists in order to get ideas and concepts that they'll use to make decisions in purchase. It's an hourly activity, and so if you're familiar with my consulting programs, your hourly activities is a much higher rate than perhaps a 3-month contract or a 6-month contract or an employment engagement. So you're going to have fewer of these, but as they do come, they give you an idea about what types of things the marketplace is interested in. But it can give you the opportunity to get a couple $100s here and there for your time. I will tell you that you might get paid for 2 hours on the phone, but there's likely 2 or 3 hours of just getting to the phone or getting the appointment scheduled. So it's a little bit passive, but expert networks can be a way for you to generate additional income. Number 6, residual agreements. There are times where you may set up a system or a process in an organization and receive additional revenue from that implementation of the process, and then you'll have a minor obligation to make sure it's maintained. Now, what's interesting about residual agreements, it's kind of like the copywriter who writes a marketing kit, and then the company implements the marketing kit, and the copywriter gets a certain percentage of the overall sales, and that's usually the gross a percentage on gross. That happens very commonly in the infomercial industry. It happens very commonly in business development circles. Now, you might be saying, hey, I'm a subject matter expert in X, Y, and Z, and I don't sell. Well, you need to learn how to sell, because you could work with a startup, you could work with an ongoing organization that's launching a new product, and you could provide your subject matter expertise in exchange for a residual income from the sale of the product itself. So in many cases, I will receive money up front and then 2 or 3%, even 10% of the gross sales of the actual product or the result of the project. So there's one deal that I was working with a property developer, and he was putting up townhouses, and there was a certain buy-in, but at the end, when he closed out on the townhouses, the investors actually got a specific amount of money. Now, there's different ways to look at this. Again, I'm giving you ideas about how consultants generate income, and you may want to work on a large project pro bono. You may want to work on a large contract as an investor. You may want to work on a large contract as an at risk, meaning you're going to get paid on the back end. It's really up to you in your situation. But number 7 is joint ventures. Any combination of these 7 ways to generate more income and actually create more opportunities as a consultant, joint ventures combines them. So it is possible for you to enter an agreement with somebody in order to work on a project together where you gain equity associated with the outcome of the project. You may have an agreement where you're going to work with somebody or work with a corporation, develop a new product or service, develop its flooring for manufacturing, or develop the software methodologies or approaches you're going to use, or design the system, where you then have the rights to package that intellectual property independent of the actual project itself, or in a joint venture with the project itself. So there was one time I developed some software, this is a while back, and I got invited out to Texas Instruments to talk about the software that I developed and then interact with their teams out there to determine if there was an opportunity for a joint venture. Now, that was way back in the day when I was a little bit naive, and while I enjoyed the 4 or 5 days of brainstorming and everything, and they paid me to be there, it did not move forward into a joint venture because it was determined of course, that they had a significant information to know that my product wasn't going to compete with them, which is basically a nice way of saying that they're far enough along on their project and they have enough capital that they're not concerned that I would launch this product as an independent product or any competition for them. And so rather than buying me out, I enjoyed the experience of working with them for a bunch of days. They gave me a 6-month agreement where I could then work with their team to further develop the product or just ask questions. And so I ended up taking the bragging rights of passing over the intellectual property to their organization because I was a little bit naive, and ultimately had a great, wonderful 6 months of experience working with engineers and other things. Their biggest concern at the time was that I did not have advanced degrees, and they were a little confused about how I came up with this product or this platform. But at the time, I was in my 20s, so I was just happy to be recognized and have some credit in the project. But long story short, it was a potential joint venture. It was a potential intellectual property. It could have been a potential royalties, but nothing I really created was significant compared to what their team of engineers created. And I had a lot of fun and a lot of enjoyment making connections. I ended up making connections at AT&T, making connections through other organizations, just through the opportunity to brainstorm and be a part of the development process that went into their particular product. Now, with any of these income streams, when you're working with an employer or you're working with a client, you will have non-disclosure agreements, you will have a clear scope of work, and you will upfront know how you'll get paid. There might be 7 ways, and there are actually more than 7 ways, but there are 7 ways that are typical of consultants generating income. Some of these ways are passive. However, please define up front how you're going to get paid. I spent a lot of time on projects that were experientially good for me. And yes, they all paid off or I wouldn't have done the work. But sometimes I could have, when a client makes $50 million off of what you're working on, I would have liked to got a cut of that. So I worked on one project. The client got $2 million in net proceeds, and I was supposed to get a 2% royalty on that, and they screwed me out of my royalty. So I'm giving you a warning up front here, but ultimately there are 7 ways. There are many other ways. The key is, which way are you going to start with today? Pick one of the 7 ways, whether it's applying for jobs, W-2 and contract jobs, whether it's paid consultations, something that you can have in a byline on an email or on your website, or you're going to create or transform intellectual property. You're going to produce royalties and commissions. Are you going to work with expert networks? That's something that's complementary to employment. Are you going to have residual agreements? If so, with what? And number 7, always be looking for joint ventures. There are times where I've provided the expertise kind of in the background, and then the front end people were doing all the marketing, and it made it for a great relationship. I've done project management under joint ventures, and very often it could be commission base, it could be a salary base, it could be a one-time fee, but joint ventures do unlock potentials. In fact, on my newsletter, I have several newsletters. If you are a subject matter expert in building business relationships, using critical thinking or other areas, drop me a line at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. We do, from time to time, have guest articles or guest contributions inside of projects that we're working on, including courses, reports, books, things like that. And I do understand how this works, so we will have a fair and amicable engagement. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations, and for many high-income professionals, subject matter experts, yes, as you get over 40, companies are not as happy about having you, and that's just a fact of life. Why not turn it into an experiential opportunity to do some consulting? Because in the consulting world, you can be 99 years old, and they care more about the results. And so if you're able to produce results, if you're able to connect the dots and solve problems, then consulting is a powerful place to be. And you're in the right place to learn these skills because we talk about critical thinking, problem solving, and the dynamics of business relationships, which I could go in another 2 hours about why that makes consulting possible. But I will stop here. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations, and I'll see you in the next podcast. Be sure to visit us at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. You go ask your questions at the contact page or join our free newsletter.